His sister smirked. He only married you for the green card. At Thanksgiving they all laughed, passing around baby photos of his ex. I smiled, stood up and pulled out something unexpected. His face went pale. As the room fell silent, I couldn't help but savor the moment. Freedom was finally within reach. But how? The baby photo of David's ex slid across our Thanksgiving table as his sister Karen's words slapped me across the face. He only married you for the green card. I glanced at David, waiting for him to defend us. His silence was my answer. 3 years of marriage crystallized into this single humiliating moment as his family's nervous laughter rippled around the cranberry sauce and turkey. I'd suspected something was wrong for months, but never this. Never that my entire marriage had been a calculated transaction. I smiled, stood up and reached for my purse. 6 months before we met, I'd sworn off relationships entirely. My bakery, Sweet Beginnings, had finally started turning a consistent profit after 5 grueling years. Dating seemed like a distraction I couldn't afford. Then David walked into my shop on a rainy Tuesday, ordered a slice of apple pie and changed everything. "This reminds me of my grandmother's baking in Naples," he said, his accent making ordinary words sound like poetry. He came back the next day and the next. Soon he was helping me close up shop, our conversations stretching until midnight. "I've never met anyone who understands passion for food the way you do," he told me one evening as we shared a bottle of wine at the small table by my kitchen window. His hand covered mine, warm and certain. "You're remarkable, Emily." After years of dating men who treated my bakery like a cute hobby rather than the serious business it was, David's respect for my work felt revolutionary. He asked thoughtful questions about my recipes, my business plan, my dreams for expansion. He seemed genuinely impressed by what I'd built from nothing. Melissa, my oldest friend, voiced concerns over brunch about a month into our relationship. "Don't you think it's strange how he keeps talking about business partnerships already? You barely know him." "He gets me," I insisted, stirring my coffee with more force than necessary. "He understands what it means to build something from scratch." "I'm just saying," Melissa said carefully, "he showed up right when your bakery started making real money." I dismissed her concerns as jealousy. Melissa had been through a bitter divorce the previous year and viewed all relationships through that lens now. Besides, David wasn't interested in my modest success. He had grand plans of his own for an authentic Italian restaurant. The proposal came 3 months later at Rosie's Diner. Nothing fancy, just us in a vinyl booth under flickering fluorescent lights. The ring was simple, a small diamond he claimed had belonged to his grandmother. "I know it hasn't been long," he said, his dark eyes serious in a way that made my heart race. "But when you find the missing piece to your puzzle, why wait?" I said yes without hesitation. When you know. My bakery had been my lifeline after dropping out of college. I'd started with nothing but my grandmother's handwritten recipe cards and determination bordering on desperation. For 5 years I'd risen at 4 a.m. to mix dough, developed relationships with every regular customer, and poured every penny back into growing my little corner shop into something sustainable. When David first suggested I sell Sweet Beginnings to fund his restaurant concept, I felt like he'd slapped me. "It's taken everything I have to build this place," I told him, gesturing around at the cheerful yellow walls and the glass cases I'd saved months to buy. He took my hands, thumbs gently rubbing my flour-dusted knuckles. "Emily, this is just the beginning. Together we could create something magnificent. Your talents are wasted on muffins and birthday cakes." "My customers wouldn't agree." "Your customers can't see what I see. A gifted pastry chef who should be creating showstoppers in a real restaurant." His eyes held such conviction. "We'll call it Sapor. You'll be partner and head pastry chef. Just imagine your desserts in a fine dining setting." He painted such a vivid picture. A bustling restaurant where my creations would receive the recognition they deserved, where we'd build our dream together. It wasn't an easy decision, but after weeks of late-night discussions and detailed business planning, I agreed. The sale of Sweet Beginnings brought in $175,000. Not a fortune, but enough for a down payment on a small restaurant space in a transitioning neighborhood and essential equipment. During the whirlwind of paperwork, my name appeared on various documents. David handled most of the legal aspects while I focused on designing our menu. "You're the creative genius," he'd say, kissing the top of my head. "Let me handle the boring business details." I trusted him completely, grateful that my artistic nature could flourish while his practical mind managed the numbers. Our wedding matched our practical partnership. A small courthouse ceremony followed by a backyard reception catered by friends from culinary school. David explained that saving money for the business made more sense than blowing it on a single day. His family flew in from Italy, bringing an air of European sophistication to our modest Midwestern celebration. His sister Karen arrived last, her designer dress making my off-the-rack white cocktail dress feel childish by comparison. Her smile seemed painted on, never quite warming her eyes when she looked my way. When we embraced during introductions, her whisper against my ear sent an unexpected chill down my spine. "Welcome to the family for however long you last." I pulled back, startled, but David was already drawing me toward his parents. The moment dissolved in the chaos of greetings and congratulations. I filed Karen's comment away as a translation error or perhaps just wedding day tension. Looking back, I should have recognized the first warning sign. Throughout the reception, David played the devoted husband perfectly, calling me mia cara, and keeping me close. His college friend Marco raised a toast that now echoes with painful irony. "I've never seen David so completely in love," Marco declared, raising his glass. "Emily, you've accomplished what many thought impossible." Everyone clinked glasses, prompting yet another kiss. David performed beautifully for our audience, but that's all it was. A performance I was too blinded by love to recognize. That night in our apartment, David was tender and passionate in ways that made me feel treasured. We stayed up talking about our dreams. The restaurant becoming a destination, children in a few years, a house with a yard where I could plant herbs for our kitchen. I fell asleep feeling secure in a future that was nothing but carefully crafted fiction. The first 6 months of marriage blurred together as we renovated our restaurant space. I designed display cases for my pastries while David charmed vendors and contractors. His business acumen impressed me, the ease with which he negotiated deals and navigated permits. "In Italy, I studied business before coming here," he explained when I expressed amazement at his knowledge of tax codes and licensing requirements. His green card application process required various financial arrangements. I signed whatever our lawyer put before me without question or hesitation. "Just formalities, mia cara," David assured me, brushing a kiss across my forehead with each signature. "I'm building this all for us." The restaurant opened to modest success. Customers praised my desserts while David worked the front of house with natural charm. I believed we were living our shared dream, building something lasting together. If only I'd read the documents instead of trusting blindly. If only I'd noticed how his affection cooled once the business was established. If only I'd paid attention when he took calls outside or switched to rapid Italian when certain numbers appeared on his phone. But love had made me willfully blind, and I wouldn't see clearly until that Thanksgiving day when his sister finally said aloud what everyone at the table already knew. I had never been the wife. I had been the green card. 6 months after Sapporo opened its doors, the dream began unraveling thread by thread. The change happened so gradually I nearly missed it. The morning kisses stopped first. One Tuesday I leaned in for our usual goodbye peck as David headed to meet a supplier. He turned his cheek and mumbled something about being late, eyes already fixed on his phone screen. I brushed it off as a distracted moment. By the following week, those distracted moments had become our new normal. His mia cara endearments faded from daily use to special occasions only, then disappeared entirely. My name became just Emily, pronounced with the flat American accent he'd previously mocked, in a tone that sounded increasingly like he was addressing an employee rather than a wife. Our evening ritual of discussing menu ideas over wine vanished too. When I'd spread my sketches for new dessert presentations across our kitchen table, his responses grew curt. "The display looks amateur," he commented one night, barely glancing at the drawings I'd spent hours perfecting. "These aren't creative enough for fine dining. What if we try a deconstructed tiramisu with coffee foam?" I suggested, pushing another sketch toward him. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "These aren't selling well enough. Stick to what works." He stood, effectively ending the conversation. "I have calls to make." At home, David stayed up late doing paperwork, while I went to bed alone, the empty space beside me growing colder with each passing night. When I'd wake at 2 a.m. and find his side of the bed still untouched, I tiptoed to the living room to discover him hunched over his laptop, closing windows quickly as I entered. I told myself it was normal. The stress of new business owners finding their rhythm, the natural fading of honeymoon phase affection. March brought our first visit from Karen since the restaurant opened. She breezed through our front door in designer boots that clicked sharply against the hardwood floors, bringing expensive cologne for David and a keychain souvenir for me. "How's married life treating you?" she asked with that same cold smile that never reached her eyes, while David carried her luggage to the guest room. Before I could answer, she added, "The restaurant looks quaint." Not quite what David described in his plans, but I suppose you have to start somewhere. Her visits became monthly occurrences, each one more uncomfortable than the last. She'd fly in from New York where she worked in finance, her casual mentions of business class upgrades and client dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants making our modest apartment feel increasingly inadequate. During her third visit, David left us alone to pick up wine for dinner. As soon as the door closed behind him, Karen dropped her pretense entirely. "You know he's not really settled, right?" She examined her manicure, not bothering to look at me as she delivered the blow. "This," she gestured vaguely at our apartment at me, "was never his plan." My hands stilled on the cutting board where I'd been chopping vegetables. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that David has always had bigger ambitions than." She waved her hand dismissively, "a neighborhood restaurant in the Midwest with his baker wife." When I confronted David that night after she'd gone to bed, he laughed it off. "Karen's always been dramatic. She thinks I should be running some flashy place in Manhattan." He pulled me close, a gesture that had once felt natural but now seemed calculated. "She's just protective. Ignore her." But something in his dismissal felt rehearsed, the way he'd avoided eye contact while delivering the line. That night, for the first time in our marriage, I waited until David's shower ran before picking up his phone from the nightstand. My fingers trembled as I entered the passcode I'd seen him punch in countless times. Nothing incriminating appeared in his messages, which somehow felt worse, as though he was being careful to delete evidence. The sanitized inbox, with only vendors and staff communications visible, confirmed my growing suspicion that there was a parallel life I wasn't meant to see. At work, patterns emerged I couldn't ignore. David took calls outside, pacing the alley behind the restaurant, his animated Italian too rapid for my basic understanding to follow. When certain numbers appeared on his phone, he'd glance my way before stepping outside, switching from English to Italian mid-sentence. Our staff began directing their questions to me about daily operations, inventory orders, schedule changes, menu specials. David remained the charming face of Sapor, greeting customers and schmoozing with food critics, but increasingly disappeared for business meetings with investors I never met. "Emily, where would you like the new dessert display?" Maria, our head server, asked one Tuesday morning. "Shouldn't you ask David? He usually handles the front-of-house setup," I replied, elbow deep in pastry dough. Maria exchanged glances with our line cook, Tomas. "He told us to run those things by you now. Said he's focusing on expansion opportunities." Expansion? This was the first I'd heard of any plans beyond our current location. That night, I casually mentioned it over dinner. David waved it away. "Just exploring options. Nothing concrete." When I pressed for details, he changed the subject. "How's that new chocolate supplier working out?" The restaurant was doing well enough to hire 3 more staff members, including a talented sous chef who took pressure off my 14-hour days. Yet our personal bank account never seemed to grow. When I asked about finances, David would say, "It's all being reinvested, building our future." But what future and for whom? I started keeping a small private account, squirreling away tips and petty cash from supply runs when vendors gave me change. I told myself it was for a surprise anniversary gift, but deep down I recognized it as self-preservation, a lifeline I hoped I'd never need to grab. The distance between us became physical as well as emotional. Our bedroom felt arctic despite the summer heat. "I'm tired" became his nightly mantra, though his bedside light would stay on for hours after I'd turned away, the soft tapping of his phone keyboard a lullaby of betrayal. When we did connect intimately, perhaps once a month now, it felt mechanical, a duty rather than desire. I colored my hair from mouse brown to honey blonde, remembering an offhand comment he'd made about preferring blondes. I bought lingerie that made me feel more self-conscious than sexy. I spent Sundays cooking his favorite dishes from childhood, recipes coaxed from his reluctant mother during her brief visits. Nothing bridged the growing gap. At our staff anniversary party, with Sapor celebrating its first successful year, Maria cornered me by the dessert table I'd spent hours arranging. "Is everything okay with you too?" she whispered, nodding toward David, who stood chatting with a food critic, not having acknowledged my presence since giving a brief speech an hour earlier. "Of course," I said automatically. "Just busy with success." Her unconvinced expression made me realize then that others could see what I'd been denying. That night, I created a folder on my laptop labeled Recipes, and started documenting everything: his absences, financial discrepancies, cold behaviors. Each entry felt like a betrayal of what we'd once been, but also like reclaiming tiny pieces of my self-respect. Karen's comments grew bolder with each visit, especially when David wasn't in earshot. Standing in our kitchen one Sunday morning watching me knead dough for focaccia, she dropped her most devastating hint. "You were so convenient for him," she said, sipping espresso from the machine David had insisted we needed. "Right place, right time." I continued kneading, pushing harder into the dough. 3 days later, while prepping pastry before opening, she struck again. Kara was his soulmate, you know, since they were teenagers. I pretended not to understand, focusing on piping cream into cannoli shells. "Who?" "His ex," she clarified, eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "You didn't know about Chiara? They dated for 8 years before." She trailed off as David entered the kitchen, their exchange in rapid Italian leaving me once again on the outside of their shared history. That night, I waited until David's breathing deepened into sleep. His laptop sat on our dining table, the screen dark but the power light still blinking. I opened it, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it would wake him. His email password was the same one he used for everything. His birth year followed by his mother's name. There she was, Chiara, in messages dated just 3 days earlier. "Missing you always," he'd written. "Soon things will be different. The paperwork is almost complete." Their conversation history stretched back to before our wedding. Back to the days when he was looking at me with those adoring eyes I'd believed were sincere. Back to when he was calling me his missing puzzle piece while piecing together a completely different picture behind my back. I scrolled deeper into their email thread, each message twisting the knife further. Then I found the attached photos. They hit me hardest. David and a striking woman with long dark hair on a beach I didn't recognize, his arms wrapped around her waist, both laughing at something beyond the frame. Her head tilted against his shoulder with the easy intimacy of long-established love. The timestamp showed 3 months ago during his supplier meeting in Miami. I clicked through more photos. David and Chiara outside a restaurant with fairy lights strung across a patio, walking along a shoreline at sunset, her feeding him a bite of dessert across a candlelit table. Each image a moment stolen from the life he pretended to share with me. Each smile more genuine than any he'd directed my way in months. More messages filled the screen, some in Italian which I painstakingly translated using an app on my phone, copying text back and forth at 3 a.m. while David slept soundly beside me. The translations revealed ugliness I couldn't have imagined. "My temporary situation is becoming tedious," he'd written to her 2 months ago. That's how he referred to our marriage, a temporary situation. In another exchange, "The investment is paying off, the restaurant is finally established. Emily has no idea about the finances, so everything is proceeding as planned." And most damning from just last week, "Once the citizenship comes through next spring we can be together properly. I'll dissolve this arrangement and bring you here, or maybe we'll start fresh somewhere else with the profits." My hands shook so badly I could barely operate my phone's camera. I photographed every incriminating screen, forwarding the evidence to my private email account before carefully closing each window and returning his laptop to exactly the position where I'd found it. Sleep evaded me completely that night. I lay rigid beside David, listening to his peaceful breathing, wondering how someone could lie so convincingly for so long. Every touch, every promise, had any of it been genuine? I replayed our entire relationship in my mind, recognizing the calculated patterns. He'd targeted a business owner with citizenship, no family complications, and enough assets to fund his restaurant dream. He'd married me for my country and my money, nothing more. For a week I went through the motions at work. I smiled at customers, created new desserts with mechanical precision, and avoided being alone with David. Each night I added to my recipes folder, documenting times, dates, and overheard phone conversations. I forwarded suspicious emails to myself. I photographed financial statements when David left them on his desk. I confronted him on a Tuesday evening after closing, the restaurant empty except for us. The familiar setting felt important, neutral ground where he couldn't easily walk away, where the professional environment might keep us both from emotional extremes. "Who is Chiara?" I asked while we counted the day's receipts, my voice surprisingly steady. The pen in his hand paused midair. When he looked up, his expression shifted like scenes in a play. Shock, calculation, resignation, confirming everything before he spoke a single word. "She's complicated," he started, setting down the pen. I cut him off. "Not your ex then? Not the woman you were with in Miami 3 months ago when you said you were meeting suppliers?" His silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Were any of your feelings for me real?" I finally asked, my voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigerators. His answer came without emotion, flat and matter-of-fact. "It was just for the green card, Emily. You were convenient." The ugliness poured out once the dam broke. Standing beside the espresso machine where he'd first demonstrated proper Italian techniques, David explained how he'd targeted me specifically. A single woman with a successful small business, American citizenship, and no complicated family ties. "Your bakery represented perfect seed money," he said, leaning against the counter we'd selected together, arms crossed defensively. "Small enough to be affordable but successful enough to qualify for business loans. You planned all this from the very beginning." The question felt ridiculous even as I asked it. The answer stood before me, unapologetic. "You have to understand," he said as though explaining something to a particularly slow child. "I've worked too hard to let immigration issues stop me. Chiara couldn't help with that. She's Italian too." No apology. No recognition of the damage he'd caused. Instead, he offered a business arrangement. "The restaurant is successful now. We can divorce amicably once my citizenship finalizes next year. You'll get fair compensation for your investment." As though my heart could be settled like an invoice. As though 3 years of my life could be refunded with interest. I didn't cry in front of him. Something inside me hardened in that moment. A protective shell forming around my wounded pride. A cold clarity replacing the fog of confusion I'd been living in. "I need time to think," I said, gathering my purse from beneath the register. He seemed relieved by my calm response, as if he'd expected hysterics and was pleasantly surprised by my businesslike reaction. He even squeezed my shoulder as I left. A gesture that would have once comforted me but now made my skin crawl with revulsion. In my car parked 3 blocks away where he couldn't see if he followed, I finally broke down. The steering wheel caught my screams as 3 years of memories reframed themselves through this new, terrible lens. His targeted pursuit at my bakery, his strategic affection, his calculated withdrawals once the business was established. Every "I love you" revealed as a business transaction, every shared dream a stepping stone toward his real goal. I drove aimlessly for hours, eventually parking at a 24-hour diner where I nursed a cup of coffee until dawn broke. Self-blame crashed over me in waves. How could I have been so blind? So stupid? The signs had been there from the beginning. Karen's warning at our wedding, his reluctance to include me in business decisions, his immediate suggestion that I sell my bakery. I had handed him everything he wanted on a silver platter, believing we were building something together. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time since we'd opened the restaurant. David's text showed more concern for the day's dessert menu than my sudden illness. Instead of confronting him again, I visited our lawyer, Marcus, alone at his downtown office. "Just some questions about our business structure," I explained when his secretary seemed surprised to see me without David. Marcus welcomed me into his office. The leather chairs and oak desk suddenly intimidating in a way they hadn't been when David and I had visited together. Marcus was initially guarded, glancing at his phone as if expecting David to call. He grew increasingly concerned as I asked pointed questions about ownership percentages and asset protection. "These arrangements are unusual," he admitted, reviewing the documents I'd requested. He traced his finger along a section of our business incorporation papers. "For tax purposes and to strengthen his immigration case, David had the foresight to put 60% of the business in your name, along with the property deed itself. Foresight. A delicate way of saying David had assumed I was too trusting, or too intimidated, to ever exercise those rights. Marcus's expression shifted as understanding dawned. He set the papers aside and looked at me directly for the first time since I'd entered his office. "Emily, do you need a different kind of legal advice?" he asked carefully, his tone softening. I met his gaze steadily, my decision crystallizing as I spoke. "Yes," I answered. "I need a divorce lawyer. And a business attorney. One who isn't also representing my husband." Marcus nodded, reaching for his Rolodex. "I have some names for you. And Emily." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Whatever's happening, don't sign anything else. Not a receipt, not a birthday card. Nothing until you have your own representation." I left his office with 3 business cards and the first glimmer of what might eventually become hope. The restaurant that had been the vehicle of my exploitation might just become my salvation. The 3 business cards from Marcus felt like anchors in my purse as I drove back to the restaurant. I parked in my usual spot, checked my face in the rearview mirror, and practiced a neutral expression before heading inside. The hardest part wasn't discovering the betrayal. It was pretending I hadn't. Each breath felt like swallowing glass as I pushed through the kitchen doors and nodded at David as though my world hadn't imploded. "Feeling better?" he asked, barely glancing up from the invoices. "Much," I replied, tying my apron with steady hands that betrayed none of my inner turmoil. Each morning after that, I applied concealer to hide the shadows of sleepless nights and smiled at David across the kitchen prep table as though nothing had changed. I measured ingredients with precise movements, my hands working independently from my racing thoughts. The restaurant became my stage, and I performed the role of unsuspecting wife with Oscar-worthy dedication. "You seem better lately," David commented a week after our confrontation, watching me pipe rosettes onto a row of miniature tarts. "I am," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. He mistook my resolution for acceptance, the slight relaxation in his shoulders confirming his belief that I had settled into our arrangement. His relief was palpable and useful. A cornered animal fights harder. A confident one grows careless. I worked longer hours than ever, arriving before dawn to prep dough and staying after closing to perfect new recipes. David assumed my dedication stemmed from passion for the business we'd built together. In reality, every minute in the kitchen was time spent calculating my next moves while appearing completely absorbed in my work. Small changes came first, subtle shifts that wouldn't trigger his suspicion. I updated my emergency contact at the doctor's office from David to Melissa during a routine appointment. I opened a separate bank account at a credit union across town, depositing small amounts weekly that wouldn't be missed from our personal funds. I secured a small studio apartment above a bookstore 3 neighborhoods away, telling colleagues it was for my visiting cousin from Seattle. "Such a thoughtful gesture," our hostess Jenny commented when I mentioned it. "Family is everything." I nodded, thinking of the sparse furnishings I'd been gradually moving in, a second-hand bed frame, basic kitchen supplies, a comfortable reading chair. My escape hatch growing more real with each passing day. Our bookkeeper Tina became my unwitting ally when I approached her after a particularly busy Saturday service. Her office, really just a converted storage closet, was cramped but private with financial reports stacked in neat piles. "I'd like to understand our books better," I said casually, leaning against the doorframe. "To help take pressure off David. He's been so stressed lately." The relief on Tina's face was immediate and surprising. She pulled out the chair beside her desk, patting it enthusiastically. "Thank goodness," she said, lowering her voice. "I've been trying to get one of you to look at these accounts for months." Over the next hour, she showed me discrepancies I hadn't expected: personal expenses categorized as business costs, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, tax deductions that bordered on questionable. "I didn't know how to bring it up," she admitted, twisting her pen nervously. "David always says he'll handle it later, but some of these practices could get us in trouble during an audit." I assured her I'd handle it discreetly and spent subsequent evenings studying our accounts, taking careful notes in a journal I kept locked in my car's glove compartment. The paper trail revealed David had been funneling money to a separate account, small amounts that wouldn't trigger attention individually but added up to nearly $30,000 over 18 months. My name on the business licenses and property deed began to feel less like a paperwork formality and more like poetic justice waiting to happen. The documents David had so carefully crafted to strengthen his immigration case now represented my strongest leverage. The irony wasn't lost on me. His meticulous planning to use me had created the perfect opportunity for me to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Maria, our server-turned-assistant manager, caught me crying in the storage room one Tuesday afternoon between lunch and dinner service. I'd received an email from David's mother, innocently asking when you two planned to visit Italy, and the casual reminder of the future I'd lost hit unexpectedly hard. Instead of offering empty comfort or awkwardly retreating, Maria closed the door and shared her own story, how her ex-husband had used her for a visa years earlier, convincing her their love was real until his citizenship was secured. I was so ashamed I didn't see it coming, she said, perching on an upturned milk crate beside me. I wish I'd been smarter about protecting myself. Her eyes met mine with unexpected intensity. You still can be. That simple statement, acknowledgement without pity, encouragement without platitudes, solidified my resolve. Maria never explicitly said she knew about my situation, and I never confirmed her suspicions, but the understanding between us created an alliance that proved invaluable in the weeks that followed. The next day I called a meeting with Marcus, my new divorce attorney Judith, and a business consultant named Elena. We gathered at Elena's office, where sunlight streamed through wide windows and not a single item would remind David of our conversation if he happened to stop by. Together we crafted a strategy that was completely legal but would leverage every document David had so carelessly had me sign. We reviewed ownership percentages, asset allocations, and intellectual property rights to the recipes that formed the backbone of Sapor's success. He's counting on your emotions clouding your business judgment, Judith observed, her decades of experience handling messy divorces evident in her matter-of-fact tone. That's his mistake. The plan took shape over several meetings, careful, methodical, and utterly bulletproof. I would need to continue my performance of acceptance while gathering final documentation and preparing for the moment when I would reveal my hand. Thanksgiving approached, bringing with it Karen's annual visit. She called one evening while David and I prepared dinner, her voice carrying clearly through his phone speaker in our kitchen. Mom and Dad are coming too, she announced. And Marco. We thought a proper family holiday was in order this year. David's knife paused briefly over the onion he was dicing. All of them? Here. Something in Karen's laugh held a note of conspiracy that sent a chill down my spine. Well, we have something to celebrate, don't we? With things progressing so well. He quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. David seemed nervous about the gathering in the days that followed but tried to hide it with elaborate dinner plans and extensive preparations. We should showcase what the restaurant can do, he insisted, ordering expensive ingredients and rare wine imports. Make it special. I agreed to everything, volunteering to handle the desserts personally, an apple tart tiramisu, and my signature chocolate torte that had become Sapor's most requested item. Behind my compliance, I finalized my own preparations with equal care. The leather portfolio was delivered 3 days before Thanksgiving, buttery soft and embossed with my initials in elegant gold lettering. Inside, my attorneys had organized every document I needed with color-coded tabs. Ownership certificates, property deeds, financial statements, and the divorce papers already filed with the court. The night before Thanksgiving, David received a call that sent him pacing on our small balcony for nearly an hour, his animated Italian carrying through the glass doors though the words themselves remained indistinct. When he returned inside, his face was flushed with excitement poorly disguised as casual news. Chiara might stop by tomorrow, he mentioned while brushing his teeth, watching my reflection in the mirror for any reaction. She's visiting New York and might drive down. You like her? She's an old friend. The audacity nearly broke my composed facade. For a moment I thought I might scream or throw something at his smug reflection. Instead I focused on applying my night cream with steady hands. How nice, I replied, voice neutral. Any friend of yours is welcome at our table. That night, lying beside the man who thought I was still ignorant of his betrayal, I rehearsed tomorrow's scene in my mind. Not with anger or vengeance, but with precision, like following a complicated recipe where timing was everything. Every ingredient measured, every temperature exact, every presentation detail planned to perfection. As David's breathing deepened into sleep beside me, I whispered to myself too softly for even him to hear, "This will be a Thanksgiving no one forgets." Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and clear. I rose early, my leather portfolio already packed and hidden in the trunk of my car alongside a small suitcase containing essentials I'd need for my new beginning. The studio apartment above the bookstore was ready, simple but mine, the keys heavy with promise in my pocket as I prepared the turkey David had insisted on having, for an authentic American experience. My hands moved efficiently through the familiar motions of holiday cooking while my mind rehearsed the afternoon ahead. Timing would be crucial, not just for the meal but for my carefully orchestrated exit. I'd chosen a simple outfit, dark jeans and a burgundy sweater that had once been David's favorite. My armor for the battle ahead. "Need any help?" David asked, appearing in the doorway around noon, freshly showered and smelling of the expensive cologne his mother had sent from Italy. "Everything's under control," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. He didn't notice. David's family arrived at our apartment precisely at 3, bringing expensive wine and critical glances at my holiday decorations. His father carried a wrapped package that he presented with formal politeness, an ornate clock that seemed deliberately chosen to clash with our modern decor. "To remind you of passing time," Karen translated with a smirk as though I couldn't understand the simple phrase his father had spoken. She air-kissed my cheeks before immediately monopolizing David in rapid Italian, their heads bent together in conspiratorial closeness. His parents made polite small talk while I finished the meal preparations, though his mother kept glancing at the door expectantly. I knew exactly who she was waiting for, the missing piece of their family puzzle that I had temporarily replaced. "Is there someone else joining us?" I asked innocently, adjusting the table settings I'd carefully arranged that morning. David's mother startled, guilt flashing across her features before she recovered. "Just hoping Marco finds parking easily," she replied, the lie transparent between us. Around 4:30 the doorbell rang again. David jumped to answer it with an eagerness he hadn't shown in months. The woman from the photos stepped in, even more striking in person, her long dark hair falling in perfect waves, wearing a designer dress that made my Target holiday outfit seem childish by comparison. "Chiara," Karen exclaimed with genuine warmth I'd never heard directed at me in 3 years of family gatherings. She embraced the newcomer like a long-lost sister while David stood awkwardly between worlds, his past and his temporary present colliding in our living room. David's face performed a complex dance of emotions, joy, nervousness, and something like guilt when he finally remembered to introduce us. "Emily, this is my dear friend Chiara. Chiara, my wife Emily." The way he separated those identities told me everything I needed to know. Friend weighted with history and potential, wife, a temporary legal status he couldn't wait to shed. Chiara extended her hand with perfectly manicured nails, her smile not reaching her eyes. "David has told me so much about your restaurant," she said, her accent identical to his. "Not a word about me specifically, just the business I'd funded." Dinner began pleasantly enough as I served the dishes I'd prepared alongside items I'd brought from our restaurant. The conversation flowed in a mixture of English and Italian, frequently switching to the latter whenever anything substantial was discussed, effectively excluding me from meaningful participation. I nodded and smiled, playing the role of gracious hostess while counting down minutes in my head. Karen kept refilling wine glasses, growing bolder with each pour. David's mother recounted stories of his childhood in Naples, pointedly including Chiara in many memories. "Remember when you two won that dance competition?" she asked, her eyes darting to gauge my reaction. When dessert arrived, my special pumpkin cheesecake that had taken hours to perfect, Karen raised her glass in a mock toast, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "To Emily, who's been so accommodating." Her smile sharpened as she turned to her parents. "Remember when we thought David would marry Chiara?" The table fell awkwardly silent. David set down his fork with a sharp clink against fine china. "Karen," he warned, but she pressed on, emboldened by alcohol and the safety of family solidarity. "But then there were those visa issues and suddenly, Emily." She winked at me across the candlelight. "Convenient timing, no?" David attempted to change the subject, reaching for the water pitcher, but his father surprisingly joined in, his English better than he'd let on previously. "We still have the engagement photos from before." His wife shushed him, But Karen was already reaching for her phone, swiping through her gallery with malicious delight. "Look, I have them too," she announced, passing her phone around the table. David and Chiara in Positano, where he proposed the first time. Each image struck like a physical blow. The same man who had pledged himself to me with seemingly heartfelt vows, down on one knee before another woman just months before we met. The beach setting, the sunset, the champagne, a perfect moment captured and saved as evidence of the life he truly wanted. They were together since university, his mother added, perhaps trying to soften the cruelty with context. Such a shame about the immigration complications. Chiara at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, studying her plate as Karen continued her deliberate humiliation campaign. I noticed Chiara hadn't corrected anyone about her relationship with David, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "He only married you for the green card, you know," Karen said directly to me. The pretense finally dropped entirely. The table erupted in nervous laughter as David hissed something in Italian that didn't stop his sister from passing around more photos. Marco, David's cousin who had remained mostly silent throughout dinner, caught my eye briefly. Something in his expression, perhaps pity, perhaps respect, gave me the final push I needed. I rose slowly from my seat, my movements measured and deliberate. The conversation halted abruptly as I walked to the sideboard where my purse sat. The leather portfolio felt heavy yet empowering in my hands as I returned to the table. "Since we're sharing memories," I said, my voice steadier than I'd imagined possible during all my rehearsals, "I brought something to show everyone too." David's expression shifted from embarrassment to confusion as I placed the portfolio on the table between us. Opening it deliberately, I removed the first document, the business ownership certificate with my name holding 60% stake. David thoughtfully put most of the restaurant in my name for his immigration application, I explained, sliding the paper toward his father who adjusted his glasses to examine it. Next came the property deed for the restaurant building, also in my name. And the property itself. The room fell completely silent as I continued through my carefully prepared presentation. I removed each document with the precision of a surgeon, laying bare the truth of David's miscalculation. The financial statements showing the restaurant's current value, 3 times my initial investment. The corporate restructuring documents filed yesterday, removing David as operating manager. The business loan documents with my signature alone. Finally, the divorce papers already filed with the court. "You used me," I said, looking directly at David whose face had drained of all color. "But I used your lies to build my freedom." I turned to his family and Chiara, whose expressions ranged from shock to dawning horror as they realized the implications. "He's all yours now, though he brings considerably less to the table than when you sent him my way." I gathered my portfolio and stood. "I've already packed my essentials. You can have Thanksgiving dinner, but I'll be keeping the restaurant, the apartment lease, and my dignity. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone." As I walked toward the door, Marco, the only one who'd remained silent throughout, stood and slowly began to applaud. The sound followed me as I closed the door behind me, stepping into the cool November air and the first breath of my new life. The key felt different in my hand as I unlocked the restaurant early the morning after Thanksgiving. The same brass key I'd used hundreds of times before now symbolized something entirely new. Ownership without compromise, decisions without permission. The December air felt cleansing as I pushed open the door, breathing in the familiar sense of yeast and coffee that would now be truly mine. The "closed for holiday" sign still hung in the window, but I had work to do. I walked through the dining room, trailing my fingers across tables, seeing the space with fresh eyes. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine changes. Lighter walls, different seating arrangements, a display case showcasing the pastries that had always been my passion. Maria arrived an hour later, having received my text. She carried 2 cups of coffee from the shop down the street and a small bag of pastries, a thoughtful touch that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "So you did it?" she asked simply, handing me a coffee and helping me pull out the inventory clipboard. I nodded, still processing the mixture of liberation and grief that followed my dramatic exit. They just sat there in shock. No one tried to stop me. The memory of their frozen faces, David's pallor, Karen's open mouth, his parents' confusion, played on repeat in my mind. Marco applauded though. David's cousin. That was unexpected. "Good for him," Maria said. "And good for you. We worked side by side, reorganizing the kitchen that would now be fully mine. Each pot we moved, each utensil we counted became part of my reclamation. By noon, the rest of the staff trickled in, responding to my invitation for an emergency meeting. Their curious faces filled me with momentary doubt. What if they all quit? What if I couldn't do this alone? Standing before them in the dining room, I straightened my shoulders and explained the ownership changes without dwelling on personal details. No one needed to know how thoroughly I'd been deceived. They just needed clarity about their jobs. The restaurant's name and menu will change after New Year's, I announced, my voice growing stronger with each word. We'll be shifting focus to highlight our bakery items and creating a more casual cafe atmosphere. I paused, looking at each face. Anyone who wishes to remain is welcome, with a review of positions and salaries in January. I understand if some of you prefer to move on. Tina raised her hand first. I'm staying. Someone needs to keep these books in order. A ripple of laughter broke the tension. Count me in, added our head chef Ramon. Been wanting to expand the brunch options anyway. To my surprise, everyone stayed, even the servers David had personally hired. Perhaps they'd seen through him long before I had. My phone began buzzing on the drive home. David's name flashed repeatedly across the screen. I silenced it, but the calls continued through the evening and into the next day, 17 attempts before I finally blocked his number. Then came the emails with subject lines that told their own story of his unraveling. We need to talk immediately. You can't do this. You manipulative bitch. Let's be reasonable about this. We can discuss a fair division. Please just call me. My attorney Judith handled all communication, forwarding only what required my attention. Her calm professionalism kept me grounded when his messages threatened to pull me back into emotional chaos. This is exactly why we prepared so thoroughly, she reminded me during a particularly difficult day when his lawyer sent a lengthy letter disputing the ownership structure. His signature is on every document. He created this situation himself. The divorce proceedings moved surprisingly quickly once David realized fighting would only drain resources he no longer had. His family returned to Italy within days of Thanksgiving, while he reportedly moved in with a college friend in the next town over. Chiara disappeared entirely. Perhaps the green card husband had lost his appeal without his business assets. Sometimes I wondered if she'd known about me all along or had been another victim of his manipulations. That thought brought no satisfaction, just a hollow recognition that hearts are broken in different ways by the same hands. January brought a fresh start as we renovated the space during a planned 2-week closure. The painters covered the dark red walls with a warm cream color that brightened the entire restaurant. New lighting fixtures replaced the heavy Italian-style chandeliers David had insisted upon. The formal tablecloths disappeared in favor of polished wood surfaces with simple fresh flowers. The Italian restaurant Sapor became Second Chances, a cafe and bakery showcasing my original recipes alongside new creations. We expanded the breakfast and lunch offerings while scaling back dinner service to Thursday through Saturday only. My grandmother's recipes finally found their place on the menu, no longer deemed too American or too simple for David's vision. The grand reopening drew local press, curious about the ownership change that had rippled through the small-town business community. Creative differences with my former partner, I explained simply when asked, refusing to feed the rumor mill despite the reporter's fishing questions. Maria stepped seamlessly into the role of general manager, her organizational skills flourishing with proper authority. I focused on menu development and business strategy, taking classes at the community college to strengthen the financial skills I'd previously surrendered to David. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had finally become the business owner David had pretended to see in me, capable and confident in decisions that were now truly mine to make. Regular customers returned, drawn by the improved atmosphere and honest approach. Some asked about David, most quickly forgot him, more interested in the new citrus tart or weekend quiche special. My apartment above the cafe became my sanctuary, small but entirely mine, decorated without anyone else's input or criticism. The relief of arranging furniture exactly as I pleased, of choosing colors that spoke to me rather than impressing others, was a simple joy I hadn't expected. Melissa, who had questioned David from the beginning, helped me furnish it with flea market finds we refinished together on weekends. Our friendship, strained during my marriage when I dismissed her concerns, strengthened through shared projects and honest conversations. "You know what I love most about this place?" she asked one evening as we shared wine on my tiny balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink. "It's completely, authentically Emily." Those words resonated deeply. I had spent 3 years trying to fit someone else's vision. Italian sophistication, business partner, supportive wife, without realizing I was disappearing inside those roles. The pain of betrayal still surfaced occasionally in unexpected moments, but it no longer defined my days or dictated my choices. Spring arrived with unexpected possibilities. The cafe's success attracted attention from a local business publication, leading to a profile piece about female entrepreneurs. The exposure brought new customers and a sense of belonging to a community of women who had faced their own challenges in the business world. A neighboring shopkeeper named James began finding reasons to buy coffee twice daily, complimenting my almond croissants with genuine appreciation. Eventually, he asked about wholesale pastry options for his bookstore cafe across the street. Our business discussions evolved into dinner conversations that held no pressure or pretense, just the simple pleasure of shared interests and mutual respect. When he finally asked me out properly, I was surprised by my readiness to say yes. Not because he represented any kind of salvation, but because I felt secure enough in myself to consider letting someone new into my life. "I'm still figuring things out," I warned him on our third date as we walked along the river path. "My trust meter is pretty damaged." His response was perfectly simple: "I've got time." As summer approached and second chances celebrated 6 successful months, I realized that what David had inadvertently given me was precisely what his sister had taunted me about: freedom. Not just from a fraudulent marriage, but freedom to become myself again. Freedom to trust my instincts, to set boundaries, to create something authentic. Sometimes the green card is just the beginning of the story. If this story of sweet revenge against a green card marriage scammer had you cheering, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Emily pulled out that leather portfolio at Thanksgiving dinner, watching David's face drain of color as she revealed she owned 60% of the business. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories of betrayal and redemption. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss when justice is served.